Hello there, dear listener, and welcome to the Crypt. I am your host, The Lich. I'm glad you've decided to join us as we delve into the eerie, unexplained, and the downright terrifying tales submitted by you all. If you're fascinated by stories of shadows that creep around the edges of our understanding, or just trying to rationalize bumps just outside your bedroom door at night, tonight we'll explore the world of cryptids, those creatures that defy logic and reason. An encounter straight out of Native American folklore, proving that maybe these beings aren't just tales, but are terrifyingly real. Now, without any further ado, let's get into our first story. My name is A.H., and I'm 27 years old. Ever since I was a kid, I've had a fascination with the outdoors. Growing up in the small town of Gillette, Wisconsin, in Oconto County, I spent countless weekends hiking and camping in the dense forest that surrounded our community. Not too far from the Nicollet State Trail, I thought I knew these woods like the back of my hand. It was this familiarity that led me to believe I could spend a night alone out there without much worry. I had planned a solo camping trip for a weekend in the late summer months back in 2020. The weather was nice and warm, but just nice enough to be outside without being completely drenched in sweat. The long hours of working a boring cashier job at the local grocery store weighing heavily on me, and it had been some time since I last went camping. I needed some much-needed time off anyway, to get away from the day-to-day monotony of my life and back to what I love most. I put in for a weekend off of work and went home after my shift had ended. The next day I packed my gear, some snacks, and a few beers, and drove up to the trailhead with a sense of adventure and excitement. At first everything went exactly how I had imagined it would go. I followed a trail I'd often frequented, stopping every so often to enjoy the scenery, watching birds fly about in the treetops and squirrels playing in the underbrush here and there. After about a couple of hours or so of hiking, I found a somewhat flat area near a hollowed-out oak tree. I set up camp in the small clearing not far from its upturned roots. I placed my bag on the ground and began to pitch my tent. I built a fire and roasted a couple of hot dogs over it, and cracking open a beer or two. I enjoyed my meal. As soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest darkened. I felt a sense of peace. The sounds of nature at night were comforting to me. The occasional hoot of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the breeze were like old friends. However, later on that night, as the night deepened, the sense of peace began to erode. The darkness enveloped my little campsite, and the feeling of fatigue from hiking out here, and the satisfying feeling of a full stomach. My eyes began to grow very heavy, and before turning in for the night, I threw a couple more logs on the fire. As I was laying in my tent, the faint glow of my lantern casting shadows on the fabric, sleep beginning to take hold as I laid in my sleeping bag. I had just started to drift off to sleep when I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the woods. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to listen. The sound was unlike anything I'd heard before, an unnatural blend of human and animal. It was as if something was trying to mimic the sounds of an animal, but it was distorted, somehow, like a mix between the growl of a wolf and a man talking, something more twisted, more primal, more dangerous. I was practically kicking myself for not bringing a firearm, or at least something I could use to protect myself. I'd gotten so used to forests and nature, I thought I would never actually have to use a weapon. I felt a sense of dread and unease creep over me as I stepped out of my tent and into the inky blackness, flashlight in hand. I had shown it toward the trees, where I thought the source of the noise had come from. The beam bouncing off trees in the darkness, revealing nothing but the thick underbrush and dancing shadows. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a bear or a coyote, but the unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach told me otherwise. I decided to take a quick walk around the campsite to put my mind at ease. Maybe it was my imagination. I had been drinking after all, or maybe my tired brain was just trying to keep me alert. I was miles from the nearest ranger station, and I was alone out here, without protection. The longer I peered into the darkness, trying to rationalize my situation, a deep sense of being watched began to wash over me. Then as I walked around my campsite, I noticed something strange. A set of footprints in the dirt that seemed too large to belong to any animal I was familiar with. They looked kind of human, but with deep, elongated, claw-like marks in the dirt. My breath caught in my throat. I'd heard stories from Native American documentaries and local legends about skinwalkers, malevolent entities capable of shape-shifting into animals or mimicking voices to lure people into danger. I'd always dismissed these as myths, tales told to scare children to listen to their parents, or to keep troublesome tourists from disturbing their sacred lands. But the evidence before me made my skin crawl. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly, and the growling sound returned. Louder this time, closer, more menacing. My flashlight flickered, and I began to feel an icy presence. My instincts screamed at me to get out of there. I was too terrified to move. The beam of my flashlight poured into the darkness, but never reached far enough through the trees. As I tried to turn around, I caught a glimpse of a tall, shadowy figure behind a tree, but hidden just enough to realize my growing fear. I wasn't just seeing things. I needed to hide from whatever it was. My thoughts running wild, tall, emaciated creatures stalking me in the night. I willed myself to move, stumbling back to my campsite, where my tent seemed to be the only sanctuary from the encroaching danger. I sat inside the tent, holding my flashlight like a weapon. The growling continued, now accompanied by strange, whispering voices that seemed to come from all directions. I couldn't tell if they were real or if my mind was just playing tricks on me. Sleeping was impossible. I spent the rest of the night listening to the terrifying sounds that never seemed to come any closer, but never quite went away either. Fear compelled me to stay alert. In case if it were a predator, I could try to escape, or attempt to scare it off, but it never came any closer. Just staying out of the light of the fire, just beyond the trees. The occasional snap of a tree branch, sounds of heavy footfalls encircling the small clearing surrounding my tent. I lay awake hoping, almost pleading, that whatever was out there would get bored of me and move on. I was tormented by the terrifying sounds throughout the night for hours on end. The threat of being possibly torn to shreds by whatever was out there loomed over me. It felt as though it was toying with me, making it feel like it would never end unless it satiated its hunger. Then as suddenly as the sounds had came, they faded away, and the sounds of the night returned. Fearful, I never closed my eyes, wishing and hoping that the nightmare had finally ended. Then as soon as dawn broke through the trees, thanking my lucky stars, I packed up my gear with shaking hands, desperate to leave the woods behind. The eerie sounds and the disturbing footprints had left me feeling that I had brushed up against something far beyond what I had originally bargained for. When I finally reached my car and drove back to town, I was shaken to the core. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods had changed me. The experience had left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the local legends and tales from Native Americans. Could it be that the old stories are more than just folklore? Or that I wasn't just imagining the sounds from lack of sleep? The fear and unease I felt that night seemed too real to dismiss as mere imagination. Typing this out feels too surreal, and in the days and years since then, I can't help but think about anything else. Now whenever I think back to that night, I can't help but wonder if there really is something lurking in the shadows of our national forest that we're not meant to understand. The woods have always held a certain magic to me, and they always will. But after that night, it's a magic I would rather avoid than experience ever again. Hello there, listener. If you're enjoying the video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more great content. Leave a comment below of what you thought of the video. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching. Let's get back into more scary stories. I'm Brian M., a 42-year-old graphic designer from the quiet town of Elwood, Wyoming. My life is a predictable sequence of deadlines and client meetings, interspersed with the occasion on the couch or a weekend bike ride. Elwood is a small town with little else to do besides catch a movie with some friends or go to the local sports bar to catch up on the town gossip and chat with my colleagues from work. My daily routine revolved around the familiarity of work and home. A few years back, I decided to go away for a weekend, craving a change from my busy work schedule. I decided to escape to the Rocky Mountains for a short vacation. I had rented a cabin nestled in a remote area, far from any hint of civilization. It was meant to be a peaceful retreat, a chance to unwind and disconnect from the stress of everyday life. Thursday evening, after yet another long day at work, I went to a local bar to meet a friend from my old class. He wanted to catch up with me to see how I've been and swap stories from our glory days of terrorizing the local PD with our antics and past flings. As we were talking, a news broadcast had come on one of the TVs from across where we were sitting. A local newswoman had come on and was reporting on a missing case report from a few months back. A new development has surfaced in the disappearance of a young teenage boy. She continued to recount what happened earlier that year. It had been the talk of our town for a while. A group of teenage boys had gone into the mountains for an impromptu camping trip. One of the boys had gone missing during that trip, though, and according to his friends that were with him, gave conflicting accounts about what happened to him. According to the oldest of the group, they had been doing some rock climbing a few miles away from where I had planned on going for my weekend getaway. I had suspected that one of them must have gotten into a fight with the missing boy, but something just didn't quite add up. The missing boy's body was never recovered in the months after the incident. Multiple search teams, National Guard, local fire, and police teams were launched in the area, but to no avail. The strangest part about the whole story was that none of the boys were charged with his disappearance, and none of them wanted to talk about what happened to close family. A quote from one of the other boys from the group said in an interview, "None of you would have believed what really happened to us up there if I told you," which kind of struck me as odd, but I just kind of chalked it up to they didn't want to be seen as bad kids or murderers in case it came to light it were an accident. After catching up with my friend for a while and trying my best not to think about the news report too much, I went home and packed my things for my trip before heading off to bed. I arrived at the cabin on Friday evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The place was quaint, isolated, and perfect for some solitude. The directions I got into the place were kind of hard to follow, and the GPS kept trying to route me through a pass in the mountains, so I had taken a bit longer getting there than I had originally anticipated. But after settling in, I took a moment to appreciate the sheer quiet that surrounded me. No traffic noise, no buzzing phones, just the whisper of the wind through the trees. It was definitely my idea of peace. The brochure I got for the place from the travel agent in town did not disappoint, at least. On Saturday morning, I set out for a hike, eager to explore the trails and enjoy the crisp mountain air. The weather was ideal, clear skies and a gentle breeze. I followed a marked trail through the forest, the ground covered in a mix of dirt and fallen leaves. I walked up the mountain for a while, enjoying the sea of green trees and fresh pine air. Taking pictures, at least I had a few memories to keep for later in case I wanted to come back, was my original thought back then. Just like my usual luck, although things really had a habit of turning sour on me, I just never would have predicted what happened next. And as the day wore on, the clouds began to gather and a chill settled in the air, but I wasn't worried. I figured it was just a passing weather change. This was usually how my luck turned out for me, though. This time I just hoped the weather held off until I had my fill of nature before I had to go back to my boring desk job. But later on in the day, as afternoon turned into dusk, a strange feeling washed over me. The forest grew unnervingly silent, as if every animal had suddenly decided to vanish. I dismissed it as my imagination and continued on, but the unease only grew. Just chalked it up to something normal out here, as the storm that had been brewing over the mountains started to loom over me. That's when I decided to turn back, because I would rather be at the cabin in case the storm did hit. I hadn't brought a change of clothes and wanted to get something to eat before turning in for the night. Just as I had turned around to go back the way I'd come, though, I heard a sound in the distance beyond the trees, a low, growling sound, almost like the rumble of distant thunder, but much closer and too unnerving to be natural. I stopped, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise, and that's when I saw it. Through the trees, just beyond the reach of the failing light, was a figure, tall, emaciated, with pale white skin stretched taut over bone. Its eyes glowed with the sickly yellow hue, and its mouth was an impossibly wide, toothy grin. I thought I was going crazy. I thought it had to have been a prank. Maybe my friend had decided to follow me up here to try and be scary, but something was off. The way it stood staring back at me, the smell reached me first though, a putrid, foul-smelling odor like burning trash and rotting roadkill. When it shifted its gaunt frame, that's when I knew it was real. Panic surged through me. I recognized the description from an old horror story I'd read. This was a Wendigo, a creature from Native American lore said to embody greed and hunger. I had hoped it was just a tall tale, but here it was, in front of me. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. Rain had started falling, the trail turning into a slippery mess. I could hear the Wendigo behind me, its breath coming in a ragged gasp, mingling with the sound of its guttural growl. It was gaining on me, each step echoing with a chilling rhythm that seemed to quicken. Desperation drove me to take a risky detour, a narrow, overgrown path that I hoped would lead me away from the Wendigo. I squeezed through the thick brambles and stumbled over rocks, branches clawing at my clothes and skin. The path twisted unpredictably, and I had to crouch in several places, my movements growing more frantic with each passing second. Finally, I broke out onto a small rocky ledge. I looked back, breathless and drenched, but the Wendigo was nowhere to be seen. I stayed hidden, my eyes scanning the forest below. From my vantage point, I saw the creature pacing around the cabin, confused and frustrated. It roared into the forest, a sound that made my skin crawl. After what felt like hours, the creature finally retreated into the depths of the forest, its growls slowly fading away. Terrified, I made sure it had retreated far enough away so I could make it down the ledge and back to the relative safety of the cabin. The storm had passed, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. With trembling legs, I made my way back to the cabin. I locked every door and window, my mind racing as I replayed the encounter over and over. That night, I huddled under the covers, the memory of those glowing eyes and the sound of that monstrous growl haunting my thoughts. I left the mountains at first light, my desire for solitude shattered by the terror I'd experienced. Returning to Elwood, I found myself more appreciative of the ordinary, safe life I had left behind. And to this day, the Rocky Mountains are a place of dread for me, a stark reminder of the night I faced a nightmare that was all too real. My name is JT, a 37-year-old hunting guide, and I've spent most of my life navigating the wilds of the Pine Barrens near Jackson Township, New Jersey. My daily routine is as predictable as it is solitary. Every morning before dawn, I set out with my rifle and gear, guiding clients, tracking deer, and managing the game population. The Pine Barrens are my domain, untamed, vast, and serene. Or at least, that's how I used to think of it. A few weeks ago started like any other hunting week. At first light, I was just breaking over the horizon. As I set up in a familiar clearing, a spot I'd used countless times before, the air was crisp and carried a hint of fall. I leaned against a sturdy oak, the sun barely starting to paint the forest in soft hues of orange and gold. My rifle rested against my knee as I scanned the underbrush for movement. Hours went by with nothing but the occasional rustle and the distant call of a bird. The usual forest sounds were oddly muted, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. I chalked it up to the time of the year and waited patiently. It was around mid-morning when I heard it, the sound that made my blood run cold. A high, eerie screech pierced the silence, a noise so unnatural I felt as though it was tearing through the very fabric of reality. My instincts, honed from years in the woods, told me something was wrong. I shifted carefully, my eyes straining to see through the dense undergrowth, and then I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, gaunt creature with a twisted, grotesque form. Its body was an unnatural amalgamation of limbs and features, with elongated, sinewy limbs and a head that resembled a cross between a horse and a demon. Its eyes were glowing coals, radiating an unsettling, malevolent light. The sight of it paralyzed me. I froze, my rifle clutched tightly, but unmoving. The creature's gaze locked onto me with an unnerving intensity. It stood there, still as stone, its presence radiating a sense of primal fear. Then it let out another ear-splitting screech, the sound vibrating through my bones. Desperation surged through me, and I grabbed my rifle. Aiming with shaking hands, I fired a shot. The bullet cutting through the air, The creature shrieked again, a noise so piercing it felt like a physical blow. It darted into the trees with unnatural speed, vanishing into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. I sat there for what I felt like an eternity, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My heart was racing, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The forest had returned to its usual quiet, but now it seemed oppressive, as though the trees themselves were watching me. I made my way back to my truck, my mind a whirl of disbelief and fear. The image of that creature, the Jersey Devil, if the old legends were to be believed, haunted me. It was only when I got home, trembling and pale, that I started to understand the stories I had always dismissed as superstition. The legend of the Jersey Devil is an old one. It tells of a woman named Mother Leeds, a resident of the Pine Barrens in the 1700s who, upon discovering she was pregnant with her 13th child, cursed the unborn baby. According to the tale, the child was born as a horrific creature, part human, part beast. It grew into a monstrous entity that terrorized the Pine Barrens, with sightings and stories of its malevolent presence becoming a part of local folklore. Before seeing the Jersey Devil myself, I thought these stories were just that, stories. The ramblings of people who enjoyed a good ghost tale. But now, having seen it with my own eyes, I can't deny the truth of the legend. There was something deeply unsettling about that encounter, something that defies logic and explanation. The creature I saw wasn't just a figment of imagination, it was real. And it was terrifying. I can't shake the feeling that the Pine Barrens hold more secrets than I ever imagined. The woods, once a place of solitude and beauty, now seem to echo with a darker, more sinister undertone. The Jersey Devil is no longer just a story to me, it's a nightmare that lurks in the shadows, and the Pine Barrens will never feel quite the same again. Thank you for joining us on this spine-chilling journey through the darkness on Tales from the Lich. We hope tonight's stories left you with a lingering sense of unease and excitement. If you enjoyed these unsettling tales, please give us a thumbs up and share it with your friends who appreciate a good scare. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest horror stories and terrifying tales. We've got plenty more to share with you, from haunted legends to eerie encounters, and we wouldn't want you to miss a single one. We'd love to hear your thoughts, theories, or even your own creepy experiences. So drop a comment below. Your feedback and stories help us keep the darkness alive and ensure we continue bringing you the scares you crave. Until next time, stay brave, stay curious, and always remember, the shadows hold secrets that are better left uncovered. Sleep tight, if you can.